Welcome to lecture 24 of International Finance, and we are continuing our discussion on the topic of exchange rate parities. So moving towards the contents, in previous lecture we discussed purchasing power parity, and we saw that this purchasing power parity quantified the relationship between inflation and the exchange rate. So in this lecture, we are going to continue that idea, and in this video, we are going to explore the international Fisher effect, which would quantify the relationship between the interest rate and its effect on exchange rate. Then we are going to compare the purchasing power parity and international Fisher effect. And lastly, we would have a comparison of these three theories that we have explored: the purchasing power parity theory, the international Fisher effect, and the interest rate parity. So starting with international Fisher effect. According to Fisher effect, the nominal risk-free interest rate contains a real rate of return and anticipated inflation. So what this means is that there is a Fisher effect, which other than international Fisher effect also holds, is that the real interest rate is equal to a nominal interest rate minus inflation. So what this means is that, let's say if an investor earns 10% interest, but in that specific country the inflation is say 5%, then the actual increase in purchasing power or actual return for the investor is the nominal interest minus the inflation would be 5%, right? This remaining is the real interest that investor is earning. Okay. So his purchasing power, the investor's purchasing power, would just increase by 5% rather than the 10% of interest that the investor is earning. So what this Fisher effect says, is that nominal interest rate contains the real rate of return and the anticipated inflation. So this real interest nominal interest rate contains 5% of inflation part, which we have deducted from it, and the remaining 5% is the real rate of return. Okay, so if investors require same real return, then differential in interest rate may be due to differential in expected inflation. So what this means is that what would be the effect of increase in interest rate on the currency or exchange rate, right? So according to this Fisher effect, a higher interest rate, although it seems quite good and investors are willing to increase their return. So for example, if interest rate in Pakistan is 15%, which it was a few months back, and the interest rate in US is say 1%, then the US investors would want to invest in Pakistan. They would want to deposit, they would want to convert their dollars into rupees and then invest them, deposit them into Pakistani banks to earn 15% interest rate. But this international Fisher effect is saying that this higher interest rate is not the real return that the investor would earn. This higher interest rate might be due to higher expected inflation, right? So because if you understand what monetary policy is, when the inflation is higher in a country, what the central bank would do, they would increase interest rate. Why is that? So if they increase the interest rate, borrowers would be discouraged, right? If borrowers are discouraged, then the money supply in the market would decrease. At the same time, the investors would be encouraged to save money and deposit them into the bank to earn higher interest rate. So again, this would also decrease money supply, and when money supply is decreased in the market, the inflation is also decreased, right? So this is what monetary policies, this is what the central banks do. They change they increase the interest rate because they anticipate that inflation would increase. So this 15%, which is the nominal interest rate, is not what the investor would earn. They need to calculate the real interest rate. So what is its impact? What does international Fisher effect or this real interest rate have to do with our topic, which is the exchange rate? Let me clear this slide. So currencies with higher interest rate would depreciate. This is what we have to do with interest rate. Why is that so? If there is higher interest rate, why is the interest rate higher at the first place? It is because we just discussed the monetary policy, because the state bank anticipates that the inflation would increase. So to control the inflation, they have increased the interest rate. And we know from purchasing power parity theory that if inflation is higher, what would happen to the country's currency? Obviously, it would depreciate. So what this international Fisher effect is saying, that if a country have a higher interest rate, its currency would depreciate, and we have just discussed why is that so. We already know what is the relationship of inflation with the depreciation or appreciation of currency. We have discussed this in purchasing power parity theory in our previous lecture. So if you haven't watched that, go back, watch the purchasing power parity theory, and then you would understand what is the impact of inflation on the appreciation or depreciation of the currency. Okay. So the international Fisher effect theory suggests that the currency with higher interest rate will depreciate because the higher nominal interest rate reflects higher expected inflation. The nominal interest rate are not higher for the benefit of the investors, but they are higher because the central bank expect higher inflation. So hence, investor hoping to capitalize on higher foreign interest rate should earn a return no higher than what they would have earned domestically. So what this international Fisher effect is saying, that as in purchasing power parity, we said that the purchasing power of home country would be equal to purchasing power of foreign country. Similarly, an investor capitalizing on the return of an investor in home country would be equal to the return of investor in foreign country. So this is what international Fisher effect says. So let's restate this, that investor hoping to capitalize to earn return on higher foreign interest. So if foreign interest is higher in home country, let's say home country is Pakistan and foreign country is US. So investor wants to capitalize on this higher interest rate, would not earn higher rate than by investing in their home country. So a US investor investing in Pakistan, because of this higher interest rate, would not earn higher interest rate, because although he would earn 15% interest, but his real return would be same as if he had invested in his home country, that is in US. Why is because Why is that? Because although he would earn a higher interest rate, but the currency would depreciate by almost same amount. So currency would depreciate by almost 15%. So if a US investor had converted dollars into rupees, invested in Pakistani banks, earned 15%, would get 15% lesser dollars than they initially had. So at the end of the day, this 15% would be deducted or would be cancelled out due to depreciation in the currency. Okay, let's derive the formula. So what we want is that real return on foreign country would be equal to real return in home country, and the real return of foreign country would be equal to 1 plus the interest rate, then 1 plus the change in the currency minus 1, and the home interest rate would be equal to IH. So this is just the derivation. You just have to understand this formula. So it is similar to the purchasing power parity formula, and it says that change in exchange rate of a foreign currency would be equal to 1 plus IH. IH stands for interest in home country, divided by 1 plus IF, and IF stands for interest in foreign country, minus 1. This is minus. So this would give us the change in foreign currency. So if interest in home country is higher than foreign country, so for example, interest in Pakistan is 15%, which is higher than the interest in US, which is 1%, then remember the simple rule of thumb: the country with higher interest would its currency would depreciate, right? So in this case, the foreign currency which have lower interest would appreciate, and Pakistani currency, which is having a higher interest rate, would depreciate. The rule is same as it was with purchasing power parity, and the reason is that interest rate do not have a direct impact on exchange rate. Its impact, according to international Fisher theory, its impact is via the inflation route. So it is due to inflation, and that's why the reason is similar and the impact is similar. Okay, so if home country's interest rate is less than foreign country interest rate, then foreign currency would depreciate. The simple rule is, the higher the interest, the country with higher interest, its currency would depreciate. The currency with lower interest would appreciate. Okay. So let's move towards an example. Assume that the interest rate of 1 year insured home country bank deposit, just deduct this part, make it simple. If the 1 year deposit, fixed deposit is 11%, and the interest rate of 1 year deposit in foreign bank is 12%, so this is country A and this is country B, should the foreign currency appreciate or depreciate? Now, theoretically, without going towards the formula, what do you think? Should the foreign currency appreciate or depreciate? I just told you a rule of thumb. The currency with higher interest would depreciate, right? So in this case, foreign currency would depreciate, right? Because this higher interest is due to expectation of higher inflation. So by how much? So for that, we would have this formula: change in exchange rate of a foreign currency is equal to 1 plus IH divided by 1 plus IF minus 1. In this case, the home country's interest rate is 11% and the foreign country interest rate is 12%, so 0.2 minus 1. If we simplify this equation, we get 0.99 minus 1, and that would be 0.01, or that would be minus 0.01 or minus 1% approximately. So what this means is that foreign currency would depreciate by 1%. Remember, the answer, if it is negative, the currency would depreciate. If it is in positive, the currency would appreciate. Now, which currency would depreciate and which currency would appreciate? We would always talk about the foreign currency, as it was case with the purchasing power parity. Even in purchasing power parity, we were concerned with the foreign currency. So foreign currency, this answer would be in terms of foreign currency. The foreign currency would depreciate or the foreign currency would appreciate. If it is in negative, the foreign currency would depreciate. If the answer is in positive, then the foreign currency would appreciate. Okay. So if you saw in previous example, the difference in interest rate was approximately 1. And this is what it is saying, that the difference, the change in foreign currency exchange rate would approximately be equal to the interest rate differential, right? So if a British rate on 6 months deposit were 2% above the US interest rate, the pound should depreciate by approximately 2% or 6 months. Then US investor would earn about the same return on British pound deposit as they would on US. Okay, anyhow. So graphical representation of this is similar. The approximate change in interest rate differential would lead to approximate change in foreign currency exchange rate. If home country exchange rate is say 10%, say 5%, and foreign country's interest rate is 3%, then this IH minus IF, which is interest rate differential, would be 2, plus 2. So it would be at this point in this graph. So what does this mean? That if the interest rate differential is plus 2%, then how much the foreign currency would change? The answer would be plus 2%. That means the foreign currency would appreciate by 2%. Why appreciate? Because it's plus 2. If in case we take it the other way around, the home country have an interest rate of 3% and the foreign country interest rate is 5%, then the inflation, the interest rate differential is minus 2, which is this point, and the foreign currency would depreciate by 2%. Okay, these point in this graph represents that they do not fall on the IFE line, interest rate. They do not follow the international Fisher effect. So there are certain reasons why some countries might not follow international Fisher effect. Since the international Fisher effect, and the reason is because since the international Fisher effect is based on purchasing power parity, then international Fisher effect would not work if purchasing power parity would not hold. So we discussed some reasons in previous video regarding the why purchasing power parity would not hold. So these similar reasons would also work with international Fisher effect. Is the idea is that if purchasing power parity do not hold, then international Fisher effect would also not hold, because international Fisher effect is based on purchasing power parity. So in particular, if there are factors that other than inflation that affect the exchange rate may not adjust accordingly with interest rate. So if you remember in previous video, I discussed the idea of confounding factors. So there are other factors that would affect exchange rate, and it's not just the interest rate that would affect exchange rate. So if interest rate is causing an upward pressure on the currency, then there might be other factors that would be causing a downward pressure on the exchange rate. Okay, this is a chart from the textbook of Jeff Madora. These are the three theories that we have discussed. We have purchasing power parity theory, we have Fisher effect, we have international Fisher effect, and we have interest rate parity. So remember, Fisher effect just explained the relationship between interest rate and inflation. That's it, right? It's not international Fisher effect. Fisher effect just explains the relationship between interest and inflation. The international Fisher effect explains the relationship between interest and exchange rate expectation. Similarly, the purchasing power parity explains the relationship between inflation and the exchange rate, right? And lastly, there is interest rate parity theory, which explains the relationship between interest and forward rate. So these two, these purchasing power and the international Fisher effect, are related to spot rates. They are not related to forward rate. Although interest rate is also involved in international Fisher effect, and it is also involved in interest rate parity, but they both are different in a sense that international Fisher effect talks about the effect of interest rate on the spot exchange rate, but the interest rate parity talks about the effect of interest rate on the forward rate. If you remember the forward rate from forward contract or future contract. We also compare their formulas. Their formula would look similar, but the interest rate parity formula would give us the premium or discount by which forward rate would change. So the formula would be same, but the interpretation would be different. So this P would stand for the premium or discount in the forward rate. This purchasing power parity would discuss the change in export rate of the foreign currency due to inflation. And this international Fisher effect talks about the change in spot rate of the foreign currency due to change in interest rate. Okay, let's have some examples. So assume the spot rate of the British pound is 1.73. How will the spot rate adjust according to purchasing power parity if the United Kingdom's experience an inflation rate of 7% while the US inflation is 2%? Now, one issue is that from our perspective, they both are foreign countries. So which one should we take as home currency? Because this example is from book. Remember, book is written from the perspective of US. So this US is home currency or home country. So we need to find the percentage change in the foreign country exchange rate, and that would be 1 plus IH divided by 1 plus IF minus 1. Okay, so the home countries, remember which theory we are using. We are using purchasing power parity theory, although formula would be similar, whether it is purchasing power parity or international Fisher effect. But you need to understand the idea. When it says purchasing power parity, then we need to use inflation rate rather than interest rate. Okay, so inflation of home country is 0.07 and it's 0.02, while the United Kingdom experienced an inflation of 0.07 minus 1. So if we simplify this, we will get minus 0.04 or minus 4%. So it's almost 4%, or we can say minus 4.6%, right? Okay. which currency would depreciate? The foreign currency would depreciate. In this example, which one is the foreign currency? It's the United Kingdom's currency, the pound. So in this case, pound would depreciate. And other than this numerical solution, if we look at the idea, inflation is higher in UK and it is less in US. So we discussed that the currency with higher inflation would depreciate, right? So in this case, the UK's currency would depreciate by 4.6%. There is another example. Assume that the spot exchange rate of Singapore dollar is 0.7. The 1-year interest rate is 11% in the United States. Okay, one more thing that is left. We have the spot rate, which is 1.73. So if we say that the foreign currency would depreciate by 4.6%, then what we need to do is what would be the so we need to multiply this point or 0.046. So this would give us the new spot rate. That would be the spot rate of British pound. So that would be $1.65. What this $1.65 means is that previously 1 pound was able to buy $1.73. Now 1 pound would be equal to buy $1.65. So it's the pound's purchasing power is decreased. That means pound is depreciated. Okay, so coming back to this second example, assume the spot exchange rate in Singapore is 0.70. The 1-year interest rate in United States is 11% and 1-year interest rate in Singapore is 7%. What will be the spot rate of 1 year according to international Fisher effect? Now remember, when it says international Fisher effect, we need to use interest rate rather than inflation. So the idea is same. We take the home country's interest rate. So in this case, the interest rate of US is 11%. It is our home country, and -1. So this would give us some percentage. This percentage would be in positive, and it would suggest that the foreign currency would appreciate. So what we need to do is that we need to find the new spot rate, which would be equal to 1 plus the answer, whatever answer we get. So this would give us the new exchange rate. Okay, as of today, assume the following information is available. Use differential in expected inflation to forecast the percentage change in the Mexico peso over the next year. So when it says inflation, we are using purchasing power parity. We just need to use that same formula, which is 1 plus I H divided by 1 plus I F. But we do not have the inflation values in this table. But we know that real interest rate is equal to nominal minus the inflation. And we have the real interest rate and the nominal interest rate. So if we want to calculate the inflation, then that would be nominal interest rate minus real interest rate. So in this case, in case of US, the nominal interest rate is 11%, and the real interest rate is 2%. So 11 minus 2 would be 9%, and in case of Mexico, it is 15 minus 2. That is 13%. So now we have the inflation of both the countries, and we just need to plug the values in this formula, and we would have the expected change in currency. Okay, This is our last example. So Beth Miller does not believe that the international Fisher effect holds. Current 1-year interest rate in Europe is 5%, while the 1-year interest rate in US is 3%. Beth converts 1 lakh dollars to euros and invests them in Germany. 1 year later, she converts the euros back to dollar. The current spot rate is 1.1. So what we need to do is we have 1 lakh dollars. We need to convert these dollars into euros, and we know that 1 euro is equal to $1.10. So we would get some euros, whatever amount we have. Okay, so the first part is, according to Fisher effect, what should be the spot rate of euro in 1 year? So we need to calculate the spot rate of euro in 1 year. So we need to use the international Fisher effect formula, which would be 1 plus the home currency, in this case is US. So US interest rate is 3% and foreign currency is euro, minus 1. So we get an answer, and what we would do is we would need to find the spot rate, which would be equal to 1.10 into 1 plus whatever answer we get from this formula. So according to Fisher effect, what should be the spot rate? The answer we get from this equation would be the spot rate, as we solved this in previous example. If the spot rate of euro is in 1 year is $1, what is Beth's percentage return from her strategy? So we need to reconvert back after earning the interest rate, reconvert the amount into dollars and see what is the percentage return. We know how to calculate percentage return. It would be current amount minus the previous amount divided by the previous amount. We need to do this step again using 1.08 and then we need to comment how this strategy would be successful. So I leave this question to you, and you can come back to me if you have any query regarding this question. Lastly, there are certain questions in book which I recommend that you go through them. Some of them we have discussed in this lecture, others haven't been discussed. So if you find anything difficult in these questions, then you can come back to me.